I'm real interested in the correlations with astrology and the Enneagram. So just checking.
You should talk with Beth.
Maybe Beth. I think
She
Beth is the
works
one.
with it. Yeah,
Yeah,
she
right.
works with both. All right. Well, let me get us started. Tonight I'll be your host and presenter because our regular host is off in Greece enjoying herself, and I hope she's having a great time. The topic tonight will be IFS and the Enneagram. A few ground rules for this group. We like to support the diversity among us. Enneagram teaches that we are all diverse parts of a whole. So if you'd like to add your desired pronouns to your screen name, also if you know what Enneagram type you lead with, you can add that to your screen name as well. If you're not sure how to change your screen name, I can help you or I can make the change for you. Make sure to manage your audio and if possible, turn on your video, especially when we're going to have any group discussion. And you may want a pen and paper to take notes. We don't have any specific pen and paper activities, but you might want one. Also, these slides will be available if you'd like them after this session. I'll be happy to share. Upcoming, so we have two evenings like this one that are coming up. One is on the 1st of October, the Enneagram of Presence with Emily Haddad. And then on the 29th of October is Celtic Enneagram Research with Robert Driver Bishop. You can get more information about these sessions and anything else upcoming on connectingyouwithyourself.com and look for the opportunities tab to get more information. I don't know a lot about those. I'll be attending and interested, just like anyone else who wants to come. The other things that we have with this group is the intentional multi-level yoga, which happens several times a week. Right now it's on hold because Nancy's on her trip in Greece, but it will come back again on Thursday, September 19th. And you can get all the information about that on the opportunities tab as well. Nancy had been offering the Empowered Living course, Enneagram from its roots to its wings, and it's going to go through a little bit of a transformation. So starting on October 18th, what she's going to do is break the Empowered Living course into smaller chunks and have chats about them at regular intervals. I really enjoyed the Empowered Living course, and I think this is a really cool change because it'll allow us to really sink into smaller components and really integrate it into our lives. So I'm excited for that. And to get us started, let's get grounded and do a short centering practice. So if you would like, please find a comfortable seating position. You're invited to put your feet on the floor, uncross your legs just to get extra grounded. And as you come into this space, focus on the sensations that occur to you. Maybe you feel the sensation of your body weighing down onto the seat, and the seat pressing back. Feel your feet on the ground and notice the sensations. Are they cold? Are they warm? Is your sock compressed against your foot? Whatever it feels like. And if you feel any other sensations from your body, follow them. Your body only exists in the here and now. Tune in to get present. Feel your breath as it goes in and out. Breathe deep into your belly. Notice any sounds that are in your immediate area, temperature, any sensations that come up for you. And as you start feeling landed in your body, move your attention now to your heart. It might help to put a hand over your heart. Sink in. And whatever is there for you, just let it be there. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to change it. You don't have to make it smaller or bigger. Just notice whatever is there for you right now. And now move your attention to the center of your head. Feel it lifting you upwards just a little bit. And notice if any thought occurs. Notice the thought from the outside, from the space between your thoughts. And watch it leave your mind just as it arose. See your mind from an observer perspective. And just watch whatever is there. Don't hold on, just let it pass through. Like waves on the shore, they come up and they go away. Imagine a beam of light coming from the top of your head up to the sky. Feel any clarity come down to you. You can be here and present in all your three centers. All right, and come back to the room. Let me switch over to the presentation. Right. Welcome to the new people who joined us. All right. Oh, why is it stuck on this? Give me a second here. Technical difficulties. There always are some. Share. Okay, IFS and the Enneagram. So let's start with IFS. So IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. It was discovered by Richard Schwartz in the early 80s. So he was a practitioner who had been working with families using family systems approach. And he switched his practice over to more individual and working with individuals one-on-one. And he noticed that his clients would talk about different parts of themselves. A part of me wanted to go to the party, and another part of me wanted to stay home. And he started experimenting with treating those parts as if they were individuals, part of that system. That's why it's an internal family system. So just to get an idea of where we're at, if you can pop in the chat how familiar you are with internal family systems. So put a 1 if this is your first time really hearing about it. Put a 2 if you're somewhat familiar. And if you're a practitioner or someone who's very familiar, pop a 3 in the chat. All right, what have we got? 2s, 3s, a lot of 2s. All right, cool. Any 1s? All right, so far looking, oh, we got a 1. All right, cool. All right, so mostly 2s, some 3s, and a 1. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about the different types of parts that Richard Schwartz found. Starting with one kind of part, which is often sad or has a strong emotional reaction. So this first part type is called the exile. And exiles are vulnerable parts, usually younger parts that hold trauma, pain, fear, and shame. In IFS, we call these parts burdened. And a burdened part is one that went through extreme life events or difficult interactions. And because of that, they may hold extreme beliefs, feelings, and behaviors. So when these parts become active within us, they can lead to some hard experiences because that's where they come from. And if we look at exiles from the perspective of the Enneagram, we would call these wounds of the type. So when we're born into this world, we have an Enneagram structure inside us, and those structures are held in parts. And as we go through our early life, as we get hurt, that'll create these specific types of exiles, depending on what our existing Enneagram structure is. And they're called exiles because they're exiled for protection, either because the system thinks that part needs protection from the outside, or because the system thinks you need protection from the exile flooding you with these negative emotions. Because when these wounds of the type come up in us, it can cause some difficult reactions. This is what we mean when we're triggered. When you're triggered, a burdened part, probably an exile, it could be a burdened protector, comes up. And that's what we refer to as triggering. And we all know within our Enneagram type, there are certain things that trigger us, and that's because of this underlying structure. So for example, if you're a type 4, that structure is born with a sensitivity to rejection. And so when that child is rejected, as inevitably all children are at some point, or feel rejected in the moment, that will extra create an exile for the 4. And that's where the wounds of the type are held. And perhaps that type or a related part has a belief that being special will allow you to not have to feel that pain again. Looking at IFS, there is another type of part, and that part is the protector. And the protectors exist to keep us safe. They keep the whole system safe, they keep exiles from harm, and they stop the exiles from overwhelming the system. These are really the parts that hold the structure in place, and they hold the personality in place. And if we're looking at it from Enneagram language, this is where much of our personality exists, in these protectors. And there are two types of protectors. Managers, like the one on the left. Managers are proactive. They try to keep us safe by controlling other parts or people or situations. Everyone has plenty of healthy managers that help us run our lives, keeping track of schedules and things we need to do, keeping us doing the things that keep us safe and functioning. But we all also have burden managers. And because these managers have either gone through something themselves or are connected to another part that's gone through some of these difficult experiences, they go overboard. And examples of this might be perfectionism, people-pleasing, overachieving, self-criticism, overthinking, judging. You can see how a lot of these are involved in this type structure of different parts, which we'll go over later. The other type of protector is called a firefighter, and where managers are proactive, firefighters are reactive. So a firefighter will come up when a fire is already there, when a difficult emotion is coming up or something that feels threatening, and they help cope with difficult emotions. Firefighters, because they're reactive and because they literally feel like the house is on fire, they may do things that aren't necessarily good from a proactive approach. For example, firefighters might be where you would hold an addiction to a substance or to food or to streaming. Firefighters might also help you with distractions or numbing. And we can see how there's certain types already that is just making me think of, what types might be involved with distractions to help them avoid these negative emotions. Behind most protectors having negative effects is usually a child part that is trying to protect the system. Whereas in the last slide, we were looking at the child parts that are the exiles that are having the strong emotional reactions. Here in protectors, we actually also find children, but they might not appear like children on the surface because they're trying to act like an adult. They're trying to protect the system as if they were an adult. But if you start poking in, many of them are children because they were created in childhood. And they're still doing some of the tactics that we started to do in childhood to keep ourselves safe. And in the Enneagram, you might come across the term false adult. And this is what they're referring to, is these burdened protectors. Not all protectors, but certainly some of the ones where our personality is really coming to play. And then lastly, the very last type of part is the part that isn't a part. So when Richard Schwartz was looking at IFS and he discovered that you could separate out these parts, and when you'd separated out the exiles and you separated out the managers and the firefighters, the part that was left was called the self. And the self has certain qualities that are true for everybody: compassion, creativity, curiosity, confidence, courage, calm, connectedness, clarity, presence, persistence, perspective, playfulness, and patience. And the self is really, the self is the part of you that where the type, the Enneagram type, does not exist. In the Enneagram, we would call this the essence, or the inner adult. This is the true adult. In mindfulness language, we might call it the inner observer or the wise mind. And when we look at this from an Enneagram perspective, knowing that this is the essence that's inside all of us, you can really see how the Enneagram really is talking about wholeness. Because within these adjectives is our whole self, the self that's behind the personality structure, that is comfortable. And it's often a state where we might find ourselves in during meditation. You might get to this point where the self emerges. It's the part that's comfortable being in the present and just working with what is. It naturally holds and it naturally heals. And within internal family systems therapy, the self is the one that does the healing. So the idea is to bring the self out so that the self can work with other parts. And sometimes it's the therapist self if the client self isn't available. But that's why you might call it self-therapy, which is one of the books I really enjoyed.
It's working now, I fixed it.
Oh, I'm just gonna mute. All right. So for practitioners who know both IFS and the Enneagram, they've noticed that there is a constellation of parts. So it's not like inside me, there's a part that represents my type 9. Rather, there are a bunch of different parts, an entire constellation that make up the type 9 structure. And in addition to that, I'm going to have parts of my constellation that make up the other nearby points, my wings, my arrows. There's going to be those parts in me as well. And in everybody's types, in everybody's part structure, there's going to be parts that aren't related to the Enneagram at all. There might be a part that's there to uphold cultural differences or fulfill some sort of role that was needed in your personal past. So it's not that every single Enneagram 9 is going to have the same type structure, the same part structure, but there will be similar constellations that make themselves clear. And we'll go into what that might look like for the different types shortly. And inside every single person, somewhere, are parts that come from all 9 points. So remember, just because you're a 3 doesn't mean that you don't have parts that are part of the 0.9 or the 0.7 structure, even though it's not really in your wings, your arrows, it's still there inside you. And there is one of the women, I'll reference her on the last slide, who really pioneered a lot of this work, is a type 9, and she reports that type 9 patients tend to have a better view of the parts inside them that are related to different points, which makes sense, right? 9's at the top of the Enneagram and can see down below into all the other points. The next concept I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about for IFS is blending. When we say blending, we mean that at any time your consciousness is blended with one or more parts. And when you feel blended with a part, you mistake it for yourself. You might say, I feel angry. But we know at the core of all of us is that self part. And angry was not one of the adjectives that the self part has. So we know if we say, oh, I feel this way, I think this, That's what the parts that you're blended with believe. And we know that the human experience is dynamic. And so as we change state moment to moment, different parts might come up and blend with us. And so right now I have a teaching part that's blended with me that allows me to keep track of time and to share information with the audience, a very different part than is blended with me at other times. And so this is how in IFS, what we want to do is explore the different parts by unblending with them so we can talk with them, or unblending with them so that we can explore who we are underneath that part. You might unblend with a part that's holding one of your personality patterns. Maybe you unblend with a perfectionist part so that you no longer feel like you have to be a perfectionist, but you can talk with the part that believes you have to be a perfectionist. And this is where we can bring the self, right? Because the self is there when you're unblended from other parts, or at least partially unblended. And in the Enneagram, one of the things that we want to do is help deepen our practice of presence. Because when we deepen our practice of presence, it brings the self higher, closer to the surface, and allows us some space from our personality patterns. And that space is created when we unblend a little bit from that. When we're able to observe our pattern instead of becoming our pattern, that's a huge step in the Enneagram. And a huge step in IFS. One of the things that you might try and do with IFS is to become more of a self-led system, putting more self energy into your everyday life and creating space between you and your parts. Very similar to the Enneagram. It's just two different ways of talking about it. Within IFS, you'll see this system dynamics part as well. So not all parts agree with each other. That's why we feel this inner turmoil sometimes. So managers could agree with each other on how to manage, or they could disagree with each other on how to manage. So you might have a manager that is a perfectionist that really is working on this project and does not want to turn it in until it's perfect, and another manager part that really cares about the deadline and wants you to hand it in right now, even though it's not perfect, and you'll feel that conflict inside yourself. Additionally, managers and firefighters often conflict because what the firefighter is doing in a reactive state is not usually what a manager would proactively want us to do. And you'll find within your own personality structure that there are parts that uphold your structure that really dislike each other. You know, that's why when a lot of people discover their Enneagram type, there's a part in them that's somewhat upset by this discovery, that doesn't like what they're seeing or part of what they're seeing on this page. There's a part in, I think, just about everyone I've met who does not like the parts that are part of their personality structure. There is that tension. And sometimes that tension is what stops us from typing ourselves, because we don't want to see that part or those parts. So within every Enneagram pattern, there's going to be harmonizing forces and opposing forces. And the same thing for your wings and arrows. There might be part of it that harmonizes, that reinforces these parts that work together. But a lot of times there's also just two different parts trying to do two different things. So for example, as a type 9, one of the things I've been trying to do is get more in touch with my angry parts. And as I bring them more into my conscious and they become more something that I have a conscious experience of, other parts will come in that are still part of my personality structure to try and shut that down. They want to control the situation, they want to silence. So I might have brought up the parts that experience anger so I can have more of a connection with them, which is great. But sometimes that's going to make other parts of me work overtime. I've got a part in me called the disappearer that tries to remove anything from my consciousness that might make me angry. And that part gets really nervous when the angry part is there or is threatening to come up. Finally, in IFS, there's an understanding that there are no bad parts. And I put here a picture of Snape from Harry Potter. And I apologize for the spoilers if you haven't seen it and we're hoping to be surprised. But Snape is a character in Harry Potter who is an antagonist against our hero, just constantly being mean to him and thwarting his progress and putting him into tension, and just is always there pushing against our hero. And so we view him as a villain right up until the end of the story, when we find out he's been doing all this to keep our hero safe the whole time. And maybe he did actually hurt our hero. He did make him upset. He did make his life difficult, but it was all done to keep him safe, because in his heart, Snape wanted to protect Harry Potter. And when we start talking with our parts and getting to know them on a deeper level, really asking, why are you doing this? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this? We find that their hearts are in the right place. And it's so easy for us to get to really hate some of our own parts, to hate the ones that are destructive or judgmental or self-defeating. But I think it helps, even if we're not going to use IFS in our Enneagram practice, it helps to know that every part of your personality structure is trying to help you, even if it's not doing a very good job. Like I said, some of them are burdens, some of them are children, but they all want the best for you. So working with them with empathy and appreciation can help them feel more safe and feel like they can back down some. Because when you're working with a protector that's maybe being mean to you or harming your life in some way, and you say, hey, protector, I hate you, just stop it. That protector is going to push back even harder, because they truly believe that what they're doing is for your own safety. And if they start to think, oh, well, you're fighting against me, they're going to try and find some other way to do what they believe has to be done. So yes, empathy and appreciation for all of our parts, including those in our personality that we are not fond of. Contacting parts. When we work in IFS, we want to talk to a part directly. And so we need to work some sort of way to communicate with it. Because you could sit there and analyze and think, oh, well, I probably have a part that does this, and I probably have a part that does that, and I bet this is their motivation. But when you do that, it's just an intellectualizing part trying to guess. It's so much more powerful and impactful when you work with it directly and ask the part questions directly. That's how we've found some surprising and powerful truths that we've been talking about tonight. And there's different channels you can do to contact a part, and whether the part has to do with one of our centers or another doesn't really make a difference, but we can contact them through these various centers. So from the body center, you can feel, what is the sensation in your body when this part is activated? Are your shoulders tense? Do you have a knot in your gut? Do you feel tingling in your legs? And that can help you know, hey, that part is present. In your heart center, you might feel certain feelings when that heart is present. You might feel grief, and then you realize that there's this grieving part that's present. And it can contact you through the head center, maybe with an image. Sometimes it'll present an image of itself or an image from your past, or it might even speak in words, although usually not like a sentence, at least for me. Sometimes it's just individual words. And the more of these channels you can open up to a part, the more connected you can be with it. But sometimes you only get one channel, and that's just fine. So that's my rundown of general IFS terms to make sure we're all up to speed. I wanted to take a couple minutes here so we can check in with ourselves and see what parts are present. So if you can play along with me for a couple minutes here and close your eyes so you can go inward. And consider how you're feeling right now. Just take a look. Right? Do you have any sensations in your body, feelings in your heart? What parts are present for you right now? How do you feel towards the part that you've noticed? Would this part like to tell you anything? And this is an activity you can do at any moment in your life. Just check in. What parts are here? And how you feel towards that part can tell you what other parts might be present. Or is it that self that's having the feelings? And come back when you're ready. I'm going to open it up for a little bit so we can hear any questions or comments. Anything about what you just experienced? Anything in the presentation so far? Feel free to unmute or put things in the chat. I'll give it a little bit longer. And then we can move to the next section if there are no comments or questions.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Katrina.
Well, when you were talking, the first thing I want to say, Sophia, is just big applause for such a wonderful, beautiful, masterful presentation. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So I have a very angry part, and I may have referred to this before in this group, or it might have been one of my other groups, but I don't really like this part. Okay, so I guess what I'm asking for, I'm going to say what it is, and then I'm going to ask for some feedback about, I can't really remember how you said, like, to make peace with it or something, or to feel good about it. So my dilemma is I have like an Aaron Brockovich part. I have Mars square Pluto in my chart, which makes me kind of like a aggressive bully. And it's not a hidden part. It's like an out in the world, let's go kick some ass activism kind of part. And it's so inconsistent with the part of me that is a 35-year plus meditator and is all about peace and serenity. And that from a Buddhist perspective, or from just like, this world is an illusion, so I don't even really need to be upset. So I don't really know how to I wonder if you could say something about this struggle that I'm experiencing relative. I'm trying to concretize using my own experience what you were just talking about. Is that okay if I?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we might do is work with each part individually. So just really connecting with this angry part. And it was interesting that you called it Erin Brockovich, because she really is a hero, right? If we think about no bad parts, like there's a good core in there. And
Absolutely.
she's being activated for a reason.
Yeah.
So one of the things we might do in IFS practice is get to know that part better, just by itself, without having the other part that dislikes it come up. And there are ways in IFS where we can unblend until it's just you and the angry part having a conversation, and get to know, why does the angry part, why are they feeling like they need to do what they're doing right now? Where are they coming from? What memories in your history are they working from? And just really get to know them, because that's needed at a foundational level before you can really shift these things.
Yeah, and I actually really like that part. I don't like it when it's rough and bullyish,
Mm-hmm.
but when it's in its healthy mode, I'm okay with it. What I'm struggling with is the cognitive dissonance I feel with my belief about being a mellow, serene, spiritual person.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting about that is you describe the meditating part, is it sounds a lot like the self, right? It's got a lot of those qualities of the calm and the presence, but it sounds to me like it's a part that looks like self and isn't actually self, because it's having that dissonance with the angry part, versus the self, if it's there seeing the angry part, has nothing but compassion typically.
Hmm.
So I think also getting to know that part and why it has these feelings about the angry part would also be helpful. Um,
Okay. Well, I feel
so
like
I would
I've
start.
asked my question. You've spent some time on me. I don't want to hog the show. So thank you. I'll reflect on that. That's very helpful. I appreciate your allowing the group to allow me to ask my question and explore. Thank you.
Yeah, that's where I'd start. So I've got a question in the chat from Tammy. Are there certain questions that are helpful to ask the parts? Absolutely. We want to get to know them, kind of like what I was talking about with Katrina. We want to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And a good question could be, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this? So we want to get to know why they're doing what they're trying to accomplish, how they're trying to keep us safe, if there's any memories that they would like to show us. Definitely the questions. And then you can just see if any other questions arise for you. It's really about getting to know them, because when they feel seen and known, they kind of stand down a little bit and have a little bit more trust in you, which is super helpful for loosening up some of these patterns. And Beth says, I encourage clients to have dialogue between the relevant parts. That's a great one for Katrina, once you get to know each one. I encourage appointing a wise elder to make choices after hearing from all the parts. I have seen people name a part / voice. For example, one has Brunhild, who was a protector who showed up regularly. I love that. I've also heard that in similar, to have discussions, some people have had you sit in different chairs. Some practitioners might have you sit in different chairs, or have like little figures that you can use to represent those different parts. Beth says voice dialogue protocol. Interesting. I hadn't heard that term before.
Mhm.
All right. Let's move forward. Oh, wait. We've got a viewed hand from Jerice. Jerice. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name.
Yeah, Therese, thank you. And I just want to echo that I loved your presentation. Um, so I've been inquiring about the self-like part, right? And how that really I renamed myself. I start at 6, and this was probably one of my most profound discoveries as a 6, separating the essence of self, like, and really seeing the magnitude of what the self-like part manages, and how the self-like part presents so self-like, right? Except what I've studied extensively with Guthrie Cyan, who has studied extensively with Dick Schwartz, and one of the things that Guthrie said recently, I'm in one of his advanced programs now. He said, if one of your parts is not feeling seen, held, if the thing you've been working on healing, transforming, moving forward keeps showing up and never resolves itself, that's a clue that your self-like part is the one being present with that, and not the actual, in Enneagram terms, the essence, our essence, or our highest self. So I wanted to put that in the mix here. And, I think there could be a whole inquiry into the, that it seems like the self-like part might even be the types, what the type's known for bringing in the world, right? Like they're like the superpower, super gifts. I bet you there's a real correlation with that self-like, supreme protector manager and the type's highest gifts also.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the self is the essence, but we have these self-like parts that kind of look like it. And if we go back, let me see if I can go back to that slide. Oop, there it is. So if we look at the words on this slide, you can see a lot of the gifts showing out here, right? Compassion, that's a gift. Courage, that's a gift. Playfulness can be a gift. And so, yeah, there are, when a protector has this one of these qualities and it kind of looks like the self, but it will have a perspective, right? A gift is not essence. A gift is that it's like it's smaller than essence and more focused. But yeah, absolutely. You don't see words on this slide. Okay, are we looking at a slide that says the self?
No, it's system dynamics. That's the one that I think you see.
Okay, well,
But it's okay. I think you made your point. It's good.
Okay. Well, I just want to unshare and reshare to make sure we're resynced up. Do you see something that says the self now?
Now
Okay, cool. All right. I just don't want to, I want to lose being in sync. So yeah, the words on this slide, you'll see a lot of gifts in there, but it's not an exact one-to-one matchup for sure. All right.
Can I just ask if Therese would give a little anecdote possibly to illustrate the concept she's just talking about, like in someone's personal life? Can you think of one like a gift of a 5 would be for, or any part, any type that, you know, you're trying to make this point of the gift, the protector manager.
I mean, in
Mm.
the 5, they're gonna have a part that performs the gift of clarity.
Okay.
So
So that's an example. Go ahead.
yeah, and so something I could say about 5, for instance, is so the 5 can bring the gift of, like Sophia's saying, clarity and perceiving into another, and yet may be driven by an agenda of, ironically, not aware that they're attached to what they're perceiving, right? And then that gets imposed on the other. Now they could be in the ballpark, right? But if it's unwanted on the other side, or the way that it gets delivered uh overwhelms the other with details, for instance, that they could lose the effectiveness of their actual gift.
But how does that relate to being a protector or a manager part? Isn't that the point you were making?
Well, then the 5, for instance, might be protecting them being an expert in whatever aspect they're perceiving.
Okay, I
Right?
see what you mean. Yeah,
Then it's protecting an element, right? You got it.
thanks.
Perfect. That's an excellent question, excellent example. Transformation. So this kind of gets into some of Katrina's questions as well. How do we work with our parts? Well, the self, the true self, holds the space to have the healing occur. Getting to know the parts, building trust with the parts, asking those good questions is really important. It's a necessary next step. You can't skip it because the parts really need to feel seen and heard before you can have any transformation. Then you can do, there's a process I'm not going to go over today because it's not within scope of unburdening the exiles, helping to free them from some of their past trauma and unburden any related protectors. It might be as easy as saying to a protector, hey, did you see me unburden the exile? They're doing better. And the protector might just melt at that point. Or there might be more that's needed. And typically at that point, any protector that's been overactive might soften what they're doing or shift jobs completely. And now they're still the protector that has those experiences and has those gifts, but they no longer feel the need to overact in some of these ways that challenge us. And so this is where more and more gifts emerge. When you do work through a protector that's been struggling, that's when some of the gifts show up. You know, so like me as a 9, I've got a protector part that's trying to figure out what everyone's agenda is and what their perspective is. And when I'm unhealthy, really that's code for my protectors feel more burdened. My protectors are more easily triggered. And so when I'm unhealthy, that part that wants to know everyone else's agenda and perspective is doing that so that I can go along to get along, so that I can prioritize whatever they want and keep the peace that way. But as I become more healthy, or if I'm feeling a time when I'm less stressed, though that same part is present for me, but I notice that it's looking at everyone's perspective so that it can hold it. And that's where those gifts of the peacemaker come out, because I'm able to tolerate holding it, but I'm not so afraid of conflict that brings out more challenging part behavior. So getting into the specific parts that you have based on your Enneagram type, like I said earlier, your constellation is going to include parts from your core type, your wings, your arrows, and the center of intelligence that your type resides in. And you might want to explore how this type identifies. What is this particular point's area of focus? What defense mechanisms might be coming up? And you might also look at things related to passion and fixation. If you're already doing parts work, these could be great of just places you can explore, new trailheads. And if you're not doing parts work, if you're coming at this from more of an Enneagram perspective, you can still explore, okay, what parts? Let me get to know what my parts are. Maybe even ask them and get to know them. So let's dive in, starting with the body center. There's body center parts, and these are going to be, had an impact. So there's going to be body center parts, and these parts are going to want to be seen as autonomous. They want to see the self as an autonomous being that's in control of themselves. This is a part of you that wants to see you as someone in control of your own body, your own situation. And we're all going to have a part that wants to do this, but body types will feel it much more strongly. It'll be a much bigger part of your life. It'll be blended with you more often. There's also going to be parts that have a focus of attention on control, order, structure, your own boundaries, and what power is there, right? We know that 8s look around and see who's powerful, who's not. That's going to be that part in the body center that's looking at those things. The other thing that I've heard from people who are combining the Enneagram and IFS approach, that there are parts that are, the parts in the body center are not concerned about controlling others as much as they are about not wanting other people to control them. And the other thing is people whose core type is in the body center have several parts that have big feelings about not being heard. So you might have exiles who feel like they weren't heard, or protectors that are trying to make sure that you feel heard. And I definitely relate to that a lot.
Are you using the word body center parts as related to the instinctual types? Or a different?
Yeah, so the instinctual stack lives within the body center. And there's probably parts that are looking for those different instincts, but all of that is within the body. By this slide especially, I meant 8, 9, and 1.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the instincts as much. I could probably add a slide talking about the instincts, because you can start to kind of see, okay, you could imagine.
No, I was just thinking that sometimes the 8, 9s, and 1s are referred to the instinctual group, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean the same
That's
thing.
why I was confused. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
but just because these are body center parts doesn't mean we don't all have it, right? You know, raise your hand if you don't have a part that wants to know you're autonomous, you know? So if we get into the specific types, you can use a lot of these areas, like I was saying, of ways you can go in and explore what parts you have related to your type. So for me as a 9, I have parts that want to see myself as flexible, that try and encourage me to be flexible. When I'm not, they get frustrated with whatever part is making me not want to be flexible. I have parts that want me to be easy to get along with. And when I'm not, sometimes there are parts that hide that from me. There are parts that do focus of attention. And mine, for the type 9, it's on focusing on the harmony that we're creating together, or the conflict. Like I was saying earlier, I have parts that look for other people's perspectives and agendas. I have things that avoid seeing. I told you earlier, I've got a disappearing part. Especially the disappearing part likes to disappear what my true boundaries are, and my reactions or anything that might hit up against that. But there are like layers, right? Because if you look at this entire slide, 8, 9, and 1 are all part of my core constellation. 8 and 1 is my arrows. So I have one part that's going to be focusing on avoiding seeing my boundaries, right? Avoid seeing in 9. And I have another part that is part of my 8 structure that is actually focused on boundary violations. And so sometimes they're both conscious, they see each other and they fight. And sometimes one is more conscious than the other, or kind of pushes the other to the subconscious. And it really creates this interesting structure inside me. And then with the passion and the fixation, the passion, remember, is the part of the Enneagram where we're trying to deal with the heart's suffering at the fact that we are not in presence. When we have these protector parts blended with us instead of the self, we're moving away from that quality of presence. That's going to create pain in the heart. And that's where we get these parts related to the passion. If me in my type 9, mostly my protectors are trying to go along with everyone else, I'm also going to have a part that tries to self-forget, so I don't get in the way of those parts doing what they want to do. And I don't feel bad about it. Well, that's how I can get into this more dreamlike, comfortable state. But it's a false comfort, right? It's these protectors coming from my passion. And the fixation is what goes on in the head. So the head center, so we can handle this passion, this pain. And so my head constantly thinking about how I'm not important, or telling stories about myself as if I wasn't important, helps me from feeling that pain of I have walked all over myself. But if my head keeps thinking thoughts that help me feel like I'm not important, that my presence doesn't matter, that my opinions don't matter, it helps stave that off, right? Until we get triggered, and then it comes back up again. And that's where this cycle happens. But yeah, looking at this whole side, I will say for my own type 9, I feel all of these parts and many more that I didn't have time, space to put on the slide. And the important to be seen as focus of attention and avoid seeing, I have of the 8 and 1 as well, but I don't have as much of the passion and fixation from those points. So I'm not sure what you're seeing, but that's just how I've seen it in myself. The other thing that I did learn when I was doing research for these slides is that the 0.9 has parts that passively resist as a defense mechanism against being controlled, that classic stubbornness, in a way that feels unconfrontational, at least to me. To my other parts, it feels unconfrontational. To other people, it might be pissing them off, but to me, it feels like this is fine. Moving on to the heart center. So there are parts associated with the heart center, and these are parts that want to be seen as valuable and lovable. The focus of attention, there might be parts that focus on connection, relationships, how others see them, and have a particular sensitivity to emotions. And we might, that's a very interesting, right? Because within a type 3 person, they're going to have a part that is sensitive to feeling emotions, and another part that tries to suppress feeling emotions so you can move on with what you have to get done today. In terms of working with parts for the 2s, 3s, and 4s, unburdening grieving parts is especially helpful. So even if you're not working with grief through IFS, working with those parts in other manners can really help unlock the whole thing. These types are going to have many exiles around the themes of loss, grief, and not being seen. Now, in the heart center, we've got the same sort of thing. So 2s want to be seen as supportive, lovable, helpful, having no needs. They want to focus on other needs, making people happy. They avoid seeing their own needs and desires or how they might be manipulating others, right? There's going to be a manipulating part that wants to get this transaction of what it feels like it needs to do. And then there's going to be another part that doesn't like that. I don't want to see myself as a manipulating person. Therefore, that part's going to then cover up what it's doing. And when you look at the type 2 structure, to go back to our discussion about gifts, you can see how there's these parts in type 2 that are looking at what others need. And as the 2 moves into more and more healthy areas, those parts don't have to be focused so much on what others need so we can have a transactional thing and you can take care of my needs. Instead, they start saying, okay, I know what others need. And I can look at that altruistically instead of giving from a space of scarcity. I can give from abundance, and I naturally know what others are needing. In the 3, wanting to see yourself as successful and valuable. That focus of attention, there's going to be a part or parts that are going to be focused on saying, okay, what do people in the group I'm currently in see as valuable? And staying on task. So I have some 3 parts. I have quite a few 3 parts in me. And there's one where it seems like its main job is when I get distracted off the task that I'm trying to achieve and complete, it'll say, focus, focus, focus. And I go back into it. So it's literally just there to keep me on task. And it's super helpful. That particular part, I don't think is burdened. It's just super helpful for me. 3, the ability to chameleon from the passion. So with the passion of the 3, right, the passion is, how do I handle this hurt? The hurt of not being present, the hurt of not being in self, the hurt of being forced to be this performer. I heard a type 4 really going into her performing part and how much it had been running her life. And so as a way to not feel that, you can focus your heart on being that chameleon, on that, on the mirror neurons of trying to copy the people around you and presenting yourself in a positive light. Type 4 wants to see, there are parts that want to see yourself as unique and special. I went to a session where we were somatically experiencing different things. And for the 4 type, she had all the 4s imagine and really focus on how they were ordinary. And oh, I will never forget that experience, because that comes right up against the part that says, I need to see myself as unique. And so it avoids seeing the parts of you that are ordinary. And you'll get that fight again. And it'll avoid seeing truths that don't align with the current emotional state or stories of hurt. And when you combine that with the passion, which is trying to protect the self by focusing on what you're lacking, then your emotions are going to be around lack. Your stories about that are going to be around lack. And when you look around, well, you're going to see lack. Rather than sometimes that's not what's around. But you don't have a part that's looking for what's not lacking, at least not most of the time.
So can you just say a little bit more about like the exiles and the protectors and managers, since those are the three parts that you kind of categorized it in.
Yeah,
How,
the
how would a
manager is a
4,
type of protector. So it's
okay,
exiles, managers, and firefighters.
okay, right. So how would you, could you give an example of like how a 4 might use, I guess, have one of their managers or protectors help their exile that is like paralyzed with grief? Is that, am I framing this in the right
Yeah,
way?
I think so. The force structure uses a lot of introjection. So it's kind of like a, you can't hurt me because I'm hurting me.
Yeah,
So it'll handle some of these things. Before you said grief, the first one I was thinking of was rejection, right? You can't reject me if I'm already rejecting myself. And there's also going to be parts that really believe that what is necessary is to focus on the pain and make sure that is being fully felt and seen, right? There's going to be parts that really want to be seen for that.
yeah. So I understood when I read this chart you made, very great. I got all that from the Enneagram, but I was having a hard time connecting it to the parts. And I think what's going on is my ego or the parts are that they don't want me to make the connection. Right.
I mean, it could be, I've found the best thing to do is just to start with where you're at. You know, sometimes all you have is a part that doesn't want you to know your parts.
Yeah,
And
right.
so
That's what I
it's
was,
like, okay, well, let me get to know you.
yeah.
What are you afraid would happen if I tried to get to know my other parts? And just start
Okay.
with wherever you're at.
Thank you.
Because, I mean, there's a really good reason why some of our parts try and hide some of these personality aspects from us. I've I I've got some parts in me that are really afraid of me finding out who they are because they're afraid I'm going to control them and shut them down.
Yeah.
Because in the past, through different modalities of therapy, it's like, oh, I don't like you. I'm gonna beat you and beat you and beat you into submission. And they do not want that to happen to them. So they're like, I know I can just play a disappearing game. I can just hide. And so the way I was able to finally get in contact with those parts is to first start, okay, let's look at the part that's hiding them. And let's very, very slowly get to know them. For one, I probably had 3 sessions where they only showed me their shoes, but you just go slow and just get to know them. I think the first time was a footprint and then it was a shoe. It's just like, well, thank you for giving me this much, right? It's always good to thank them so they understand that you're not fighting. You want to get to know them. Okay. Head center. So our head center parts want to be seen as logical, rational. They have a focus of attention on gathering information, analyzing the information, using logic, and a particular focus especially on what can be trusted and what can't be trusted, and on safety. And in the 7, it looks a little bit more like safety from boredom or safety from pain rather than necessarily like safety from risk. Just a little bit more of that quality. There's going to be parts that are concerned about whether to trust, just in general, right? And that's going to affect IFS because there's going to be those same parts are going to look at your other parts and not trust them, or look at IFS and not trust it and have a lot of additional questions. So in people who identify at 0.6, to get to the IFS process, there's probably going to be a doubting part that's going to have a lot of questions and does not want to move forward until you've answered all of these questions, or at least enough to its satisfaction. In the head center, 5, 6, and 7, And we've talked a bit about 5 already, wanting to feel like they are competent and knowledgeable. My stepfather's a 5, and as he ages, whenever he's going through a health related thing, I can really see this part coming out, trying to, like, he had a concussion a year or two ago, and his first sense, the first part that comes up is, well, I just had a concussion, but I want to still see myself as knowledgeable and competent. And so he started regurgitating these facts. And I could see he was trying to convince himself that he still was that. And so then everything felt okay, as long as he could prove to himself he was still knowledgeable. Another thing I want to point out on this slide is we know that every person is going to have that constellation of parts that includes their arrows, right? And so we've got the 5 and the 7 that include both of themselves. And in the 5, there's going to be a part that is avoiding seeing an optimistic outlook and abundance, which is going to directly conflict with the parts within that 5 that are related to point 7, that is specifically looking for optimism and looking for abundance. And so you might get it like when we talk about going to a point in stress, when the protector parts of 5 have gone as far as they can get and they're still really stressed out, there's like this failover that goes to 7, and then you'll get different protector parts come out when you're in that stress response of going to your stress point in that way. And that's when the parts that are usually not allowed to flourish in the 5 of looking at optimism and seeing abundance will come out. But because you're so stressed, that's when it's going to look like the low side of 7. And if you can work as a 5 to access the high side of 7, then you're going to see the parts in their best form, in their most gifted form, that can actually see some optimism, which is so helpful for 5s, because the 5 protectors can be pretty cynical to try and protect themselves. What else do I want to say? For 7s, there's going to be parts that really want to focus on pleasurable experiences and parts that really want to move away from difficult feelings. So first it's like, well, let's not even talk about that subject because there's difficult feelings there. And if that fails, it's like, okay, if we're already started talking about it, let me just try and reframe it so I don't have to get into the difficulty and pain. And the thing about IFS is, going into a session where you're trying to connect with an exile, where you're trying to unburden, that you are going to come into pain. There is some pain during that process. And so 7s may have a lot of avoidance of IFS for that reason. One of the things they said helps is unblending from those parts, from the part that's really trying to avoid the negativity so much. And also reminding the whole system that once the IFS session is over, you're going to have less pain in your life in the future overall. And then some of those parts can step aside and go, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet. Yeah, just reminding that part that this will be integrating the painful experience so that it can be processed and not stay stuck. Because it's so interesting. I been married to a 7 for 17 years, and it's been so interesting to watch how his constellation of parts trying to move away from the pain has actually wound up giving him more pain in the end. And so, yeah, that can be a struggle for 7s going into IFS. Yeah, and the 6 parts that are doubting and don't like surprises. So they might need additional information and also to really understand what the whole process is going to be, which is outside the scope of tonight. I think the last thing I want to bring up this slide is The 6, avoiding seeing their own inner guidance. So there's a part that's avoiding seeing their own inner guidance. And that inner guidance is living in the self. The self has that clarity. That's the access to presence and intuition and just that knowing of what's right to do in this moment.
Hmm.
I see Jerice, your hand's up.
Yeah, that's so good. And I see there's some fellow 6s in this group here tonight. And I just wanted to echo, what you just said, and the knack when that feeling of doom and angst arises in us as 6s. This is where the IFS awareness is so incredibly helpful in some ways for me, more than any other combination of a modality with the Enneagram, because when that feeling comes up, I can know I'm blended. And then that's my clue to breathe, uh, get into my heart center, really call forth my presence and unblend.
I love that. Yeah, I have several things where it's like, if I notice this feeling or I notice this reaction, I know I'm blended with this part. And if you're blended with that part, it means that part believes it needs to protect you. And so breathing, anything that brings in that sort of meditative observer mind, you know that that's going to bring in self. And
Right.
self allows the parts to stand down to some extent. That's really good observation.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm just feeling a little self-conscious because not a lot of other people are asking questions, but I'm going to jump in because I felt like a lightning bolt or a light bulb over my head. So I want to say it, and I want to ask for an additional illumination about it, possibly. So I noticed that as a 4 who's been dealing with some circumstances that have resulted in a lot of grief and PTSD for many, many years, I have lost touch completely with the 7 part of me that is playful and happy. And I notice that I really don't like 7s, actually, because it's like, God, they're so shallow. Can't you ever be serious? Do you always have to be, anyway, a lot of judgmentalness about that kind of playboy, play. And I just had this moment of like heartache in this talk where I'm like, oh my God, that part, there's that part of me somewhere exiled, I guess it's exiled. And it's so disappeared. It's like like one of those narco people that disappears people, that it felt like that part of me has gotten disappeared and I don't know how to get it back. And I know I'm talking through the grief and the PTSD kind of right now, but wow, it was just so it was just an interesting connection for me to like the Enneagram information and the exiled part. And yeah, I mean, I guess the instruction would be to like, well, try to get to know that part, see if you can see a footprint, see if you can see a shoe. I mean, but wow, it was just really an interesting thing about how much judgmentalness I have about those 7s, and and that it's because that part of me has been so exiled. So anyway, thank you for letting me ramble on.
Yeah.
I hope that all these ramblings I say are not just helpful to me, but maybe they're helpful to other people too.
I think absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing up questions. I think they've definitely added. As you talk, a couple things come to mind. I suspect that the parts within you that are type 7 are probably not exiled. Because remember, with the exiles, that's holding trauma, pain, some sort of negative experience. And my guess is it's probably not that. My guess is, and what I've noticed within myself, is the types on the Enneagram that I don't feel as in touch with are protector parts that have been deactivated. They're blended with me so rarely that I don't really have an experience of being them. And it sounds to me that there's parts in you that are trying to protect you from that 7 perspective, right?
Oh,
It's like
okay.
the parts in you that are looking at another 7 and judging them for it are probably also turning inward and looking at any potential parts that could allow you to embody that and judging those parts as well and keeping them hidden. I would recommend working with those parts that are judging your 7 qualities and asking them questions and just really, put aside your judgment of them and just get to know what are you afraid would happen if I spent this afternoon playing? And you might find something surprising, or you might just deepen your bond with those parts. Just simply having a conversation with a protector from self. See if you can get in, use some meditation, get to some of those self qualities, and then investigate and see what comes. Just be curious.
Well, one thing that's coming up right now, I've told you before quite a few times that I also look through the lens of NVC, nonviolent communication. And as I was listening to you and just reflecting on this, there's just this huge unmet need, huge, for play,
Yeah.
lightness, happiness. It's just like it's just dead in me. And so, yeah, so I just, I, it was a good insight. And I hope other people have had some good insights tonight too.
Yeah, we all need play. Like we need play. And 7 for me are some of the parts that I experience the most rare. They're not very often active, but my system took a different approach. It's why I married a 7. It's like I want that, but I can't have it in me. So I'm going to try and get it from you. And I want more of that from me. So you and we're going to find our 7 parts. Just try a little play. Just see what happens. I do see another hand up. Beth?
It's really interesting to listen to the generalizations that are held and put forth, because I'm a self-preservation 7, and I've spent most of my adult life doing extreme adulting and extreme parenting and extreme responsibility. And at one point I was given an assignment by somebody I was working with to go have fun, and I thought, oh, another thing on my to-do list. So, now I'm certainly capable of doing my, distraction avoidance. I play out my 7-ness, but it sure isn't shallow and it sure isn't playful. Just interesting to hear you characterize it that way, because that has not been my truth for 50 years. So.
Sorry.
Oh no, not at all. Just just a different perspective for you to try on. It's like, I am so 7, and those characteristics are not what have characterized my life. So.
Yeah. Your parts are trying to achieve that, but using a different way. And in terms of like subtypes, I lead with the sexual dominant, but I see parts from the other 2 in me as well. They're just not there very often. And for me, I'm self-pres at the bottom. So the part that's like, hey, did you lock the door, comes up so rarely, but it's there. So that's an interesting, yeah, I when I made this slide, I was collaborating with my 7, and he's a sexual 7 as well. So a lot more idealism and play, but They're all trying to achieve the same thing. They're all trying to look for the positive and avoid the pain. And Katrina in chat, there's 2 people saying they appreciate your involvement. So like that. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like in the Enneagram in general, we tend to overgeneralize because we, like, as humans, you know, there's a part within us that wants to like have these distinct boxes, and the Enneagram is just bigger than that. So thanks for the reminder. All right, I had this activity set up to do some more parts work, but I think I'm going to skip it because we're getting a little bit shorter for time than I was expecting to. So I think I'll skip this guy. All right, so things that we can do now that we have a good understanding of IFS and the Enneagram and how they play together. My first advice, even if you're not going to use IFS for your Enneagram work, is to engage more of your parts. And this is exactly what we were talking about, Katrina. You can move around the circle by nurturing your other parts. You can actually, if you are able to make contact with some of your playful parts, if you can work through the ones that are trying to block you from it, just by inhabiting that and getting to know that, you're growing that part and you're growing the ability of that part to be in your conscious experience. And I know on this slide, it's got like 1 part per person, but yeah, just remember it's a constellation. I just chose this picture because it was a representation. But yeah, you can do it with anything. You can explore parts you don't typically use. The cool part about exploring parts that you don't typically use is they're going to be outside of your personality pattern, right? So like our overactive protectors, the ones that are coming up and causing problems, the ones that are overdoing our Enneagram type and lead us to the lower health levels, they've been through some stuff. They've been through the tough times with us. They were blended with us when bad things happened. But if you explore another part that doesn't show up as much, that isn't overactive, and you strengthen your connection with it, now you've got another avenue of another way to exist in the world that is that's as far from triggered as you could be. Another way of being doesn't have this baggage. So yeah, one part of IFS is you can work with the parts that are in distress, but another thing you can do is cultivate these other parts. Can't remember who I was reading that was talking about cultivating an inner champion and just getting to know a part that maybe hasn't existed very much, but helping to cultivate it. If you could start with the high side of your wings and your arrows. So I could look at, actually, this is recently, I've been trying to embody some of the high side of 6, as I haven't done that in a while. And 6 is an area where, unless I'm like going to it from stress, it doesn't have a lot of burdens because I didn't happen to be inhabiting the 6 parts when bad stuff happened to me. So it can be a way out. Yeah.
Would it be relevant or helpful to cultivate that in the direction of your arrow, your direction of growth? Like to get that, for me as a 4, to really get the parts that have like 1 energy, 1 qualities?
Yes, I think so, but not just that area. And you can play around with what makes sense for you.
Okay.
I know from Russ Hudson's theory, you should start by looking at the high side of your growth arrow, as they call it, which isn't a great name, but you could start there. And once you've gotten really good in there, then there's what they call the missing piece. And those are the parts from your stress arrow, but the high side of it. So that's why I've been trying to specifically look at the high side of 6, because for me, that's a missing piece. That's this part that it just feels like outside of my awareness. It's like, I have this in me? Really? Okay. So that's what he would say. I think it's just good to explore and see what's true for your system. But the Enneagram theory would say, yes, looking at the high side of your path of growth is a good place to start. All right. So remember from earlier on, there are no bad parts. So even if you feel like some part of your personality is opposing you, causing you problems, it's not your enemy. You know, the part in me that's trying to avoid seeing when someone crosses my boundary or asks too much of me does want the best for me. They're not allowing me to have my best, but it's not my enemy. So even if you're not going to use IFS within your Enneagram, I would recommend looking at the parts of your personality structure that you don't like with compassion. And know that they have your best interest at heart, even if they're not good about how to do that. Number one, that's more accurate to the truth. And number two, it's more fruitful. Right? I've talked to type 1s. If they go to war with their inner critics, they're going to get more back in equal measure. But if they look at their inner critic and say, I know you love me and I know you care and I love you too, then the inner critic is like, oh, okay, you get it. All right. And is more willing to work with you instead of against you. If you appreciate what it's trying to do. You know, when I started realizing that the part inside me that was being passive aggressive instead of just saying my piece, that it was wanting me to be connected to other people and just having that, oh, you want that. I really appreciate that you want that, was really, really helpful. So the more you fight with a part, the more you're going to be blended with another part that's fighting it, which is definitely not the self. And they're both going to fight against each other. It's like, did anyone make oobleck as a kid, where you make the baking powder with water and it creates this substance where if you hold it in your hand, it's like water. But if you try and squeeze it, it turns solid and breaks and like, and so it's just like working with instead of working against can make all the difference and actually allow you to shift the personality pattern. And if you do it with an IFS session that includes unburdening, that's extra strong. But you can even take this approach starting now. Having compassion for our patterns. And that's one of the things that allows the self to come forth, because the self is where that true compassion lies, and curiosity. So if we have compassion and curiosity for our personality patterns, we're bringing in more self energy. And we're unblending a little bit. Working with parts and Enneagram patterns. So we talked about some of this. Number one, making space for the self. Simply engaging with more self energy will loosen the personality structure, even if you don't do anything else with your parts. It's one of the reasons that we have centering practices at the beginning of this evening. And a lot of the Enneagram talks I've gone to also have the centering practice, just to engage the self, bring it in. And that helps build up trust between the self and protectors. And we know the protectors is where the personality structure lies, and the self is where your essence is. So building up that trust between the two, when the protectors trust the self, they're much less likely to act up. Because remember, most of them are just kids trying to be adults. If they know there's an actual adult in the room, it can be a relief and they can step down. Working with trauma and triggers. So we know that at the basis of these structures are these exiles holding trauma, being triggered. And you can either work with the exiles through IFS, or you can work with your trauma. And that will also help your exiles unburden. So the woman I'm working with right now, we do IFS work, but rather than going through the IFS unburdening process, she does EMDR with that exiled part. So any ability to just work with the trauma will help relax the exiles, which means their associated protectors often relax as well, because they don't need to protect you as much.
Nice.
And observing your parts in action, seeing what activates them. Oh, this part just came up. What was happening just before when this part arose? Just with curiosity. Oh, I see a distracting part. What was it distracting me from? You know, I sit down to do something. I'm like, oh, I have this intention to do something. And then all of a sudden parts come up. Oh, you're hungry. You have to pee, all this stuff. And it's like, no, those parts, sometimes, yes, that's true. But sometimes they wanted to distract me from whatever I was trying to do. And just noticing that, not even forcing anything, just noticing. What am I wanting to, what is this part wanting to distract me from, or whatever it happens to be doing? And this allows two things. One, more self-energy comes in, because that's if you're observing with curiosity, that's probably the part of you that's observing. And getting to know your protectors, healing their exiles, just seeing it will soften your personality a little bit. And when you soften that personality and the protectors can step down, then your gifts will emerge. All right, further reading. Tammy Sullenberger and Joan Ryan have done a ton of work in this area. If you want additional information, they've got a book chapter, they've got podcast episodes, they do workshops, which I looked at their podcast book. Joan did an IEA conference session. I haven't actually done the workshops, but I've looked at all of their other stuff, and a lot of this presentation tonight was based on their findings. Tammy comes from the IFS world and learned the Enneagram, and Joan comes from the Enneagram world and learned IFS, and they practice together. It's great. Yeah, a lot of good resources for IFS. The two I've engaged with the most is No Bad Parts and Self-Therapy. If you're curious about some of what I've talked about here, but you don't want to find someone who's an IFS practitioner, or for some reason that doesn't make sense for you right now, Self-Therapy walks you through how you can do an IFS session with yourself. So I thought that was pretty cool, and that was the first thing I did to come into here. And I've been in love with IFS ever since. So thank you for sticking with me through all this, and I'm going to open it up for closing nuggets. All right. So I'll go around the room, and if you could provide just short closing nuggets, whatever feels like it wants to come up. And I'll start with Kelly, and then we'll go to Jason.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm just appreciating the three distinctions of the exile, the protectors, and the self. It really helps me to put things in perspective a bit, and realizing that the self actually isn't a part. Or you said it's like the part that isn't a part, right? So that's been really helpful for me to put all of the pieces together. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, and then George.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Sophia. I thought this was really interesting. I'm a big fan of both IFS and Enneagram separately, and it's really great to see them coming together in one kind of thought process. I found the charts that you shared that had the possible parts to explore for each of the Enneagram types very, very helpful. So I know that I'm going to continue to explore that a little bit more for myself and then also my clients.
Great, great.
Thank you.
George and then Katrina.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. These are actually my two major orientations, are the Enneagram and parts, and it seems like so natural that they should come together, and I think the parts world is a little bit further along than Enneagram world in that, and it's so thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Katrina and then Jerice.
Oh, mine is bravo, 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 bravo. If anybody else wants to join me in appreciating Sophia, like awesomely done, really excellent presentation. And yeah, just very helpful, some very helpful stuff there for me. And I think the last thing is just I've been imagining that Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz, with the fairy godmother kind of person with the bubble, when she comes in the bubble. I was trying to come up with like a nurturing adult self. And I was thinking of that as the self. And now I realize it's just another part. so,
And that's
that
okay. We
helpful.
love our parts.
Yeah, helpful part for me. Okay, thank you, Sophia. Fabulous. I hope that you can use this recording to share it with other people, because I thought you just did a great educational job.
Well, thank you. And thanks for everything you brought to it as well. Cherise and then Beth.
Yeah, thank you so much. You really did an amazing job. I echo Katrina's enthusiasm. And yeah, no, I'd love to know. I mean, actually, I'm curious about, your work and I don't really know anything about you. And so I'd be curious, like, if do you coach, and like what your approach is? And I've just been personally piecing together the Enneagram and IFS myself. And to me, it's been so obvious about how when I'm working with a client, it's like, oh, my, whatever their type is, I naturally had been seeing aspects of themselves, aspects of the Enneagram come through as parts. And then while I may not have a discussion at the end of a session, sometimes I piece that together depending on their interest in the Enneagram.
Yeah, well, and sometimes you can type someone by getting to know their parts.
Exactly.
It kind of emerges.
Totally. Yeah. So
my
anyway.
personal background, I am not a practitioner. I am just obsessed with everything about therapy. I read books for therapists all day long, and it's I'm on the spectrum. It's my special interest. So I'd been doing my own Enneagram research and IFS research since 2020. I've been doing Enneagram since 2017, and I've been studying IFS pretty significantly since 2020. And then when I came across Joan Ryan's presentation at the IEA conference last year, I just devoured everything I could find out from anyone who used those two terms. So I read all of their stuff, and also there's a few people on YouTube who are both practitioners and with a knowledge of the Enneagram talking about their own structures. So I'm just a learner, I would say, but hopefully it's useful.
Could you share those people on YouTube in the chat or somewhere somehow?
Yep.
So we could get more information?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And all right, so Beth and then Tammy, and I'll share these names in the chat too.
And do you have a Facebook page or group? Or are you on LinkedIn or any place you share nuggets besides this community?
Just here. Yeah, no, I just go to Enneagram meetups, and yeah, I'm just here. I'm a member of the community. I don't have a social media presence. And I'll put my email in the chat as well. If you email me after tonight, I will happily share slides. Okay. All right, Beth and then Tammy.
Thank you. As everyone else has said, this has been so fascinating. I've been a coach for 30 years. So I've developed my own amalgam as I've gone along the way. But I have, as Jason said, I've studied the Enneagram and the IFS kind of in the silos, and I hadn't really thought about how to integrate them with each other, but it just makes complete sense to do that. So you've
Just line up.
opened up a new vista of how I can use those tools that I'm already pulling in, aspects of kind of intuitively. Now I can do it maybe more intentionally. So thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, Tammy and then Tracy.
Thanks so much, Sophia. I am thrilled that I was able to join and see this presentation tonight. It's been a great introduction to IFS for me, and very intriguing and helpful to really think of another way to use the Enneagram and, approach those parts with curiosity. So thank you so much for sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, Tracy and then Arlene.
Thanks, Sophia. Great to see you and everybody else in the community. I haven't been around for a little while. I kind of missed a little of the intro, but I think for me, the IFS is really interesting. It's just another tool in the toolbox for that, the goal of integration of my 1 through 9, even sitting at a 6, right? So just another tool when I get into doubt or anxiety to just bring me back to the present and look at the parts and either blend or unblend, whichever I need to do in that moment. So thank you. Very cool. Good to see
That's
everybody.
making me remember, I heard a talk from Russ this weekend all about 6. It was like 6 hours of 6. And one of the things he said is very helpful is to do a grounding presence, get connected to your body and your heart, which is, we know, bringing in the self, and then focus on the stillness and clarity in the head center.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Arlene and then Natalia. Arlene, you're muted. All right, maybe let's hear from Natalia, and Arlene, hopefully you can get unmuted soon.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. It was great information for me. I've been studying Enneagram for years, but very new to IFS. And now you ignited my interest in knowing much more about IFS. Like in particularly, I would love to know maybe more kind of practical suggestions or tips on how to access these parts of ours, especially those that don't want to be accessed.
I would suggest the book Self-Therapy as a good place to start, or find an IFS practitioner in your area. That's a very long conversation, and I decided because I wanted to focus on other things tonight not to bring that up. But yeah, they will go through specifically what the steps are, and I found it very useful.
Great. Thank you very much.
If you get the audiobook form, I'm not sure if it's in a non-audiobook form, but if you get the audiobook, they actually have, there's places where you can close your eyes and go inward and follow prompts.
Okay, so it's self-therapy, all right? The book. Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
In fact, give me a second, because I know there's 2 books called Self-Therapy. Let me grab this author.
Okay.
I want to say it's by someone early. Okay.
Jay Early, somebody wrote
Jay
in.
Early. Thank you,
Okay.
Jay
Take
Early.
one out. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And were
Yeah.
you going to give us the names of the YouTube people that are doing the Enneagram and IFS?
Yep, they're in the chat. So
Oh,
you
they
can
are?
find them on YouTube, and then they also have a podcast. I don't know if
Oh,
the podcast is on YouTube.
Tammy and Joan?
That's the one.
Okay, I thought you meant there were two other people.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. They're the ones with the podcast. They're the
Okay.
experts in this area for sure. And I guess Arlene's gone. Oh well. Well, thank you everybody for joining and for participating. I really appreciated everyone's input and thank you for being with me tonight. And yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
It was really wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.